Welcome to Ordinary to Badass. Whether you're ordinary or badass, I am so glad you're here. Today's guest is Shayna Francesca. Shayna, thank you so much for being here. Excited to have you on the show.
Thanks, Maria. I'm excited to be here.
So before we go any further, I've got to ask you, do you consider yourself ordinary or badass?
Total badass.
Yes, I love it. Have you always felt that way?
No, definitely not. I think when we're born, we do feel like a badass because we don't know anything else, right? We're just ourselves. And then I think so much of our society is messages that tell us that to be accepted into normal society. And I'm like air quoting that. You have to give up your badassery in order to go and be normal, right? But what in the world is normal? And so I think, for me, I had a very difficult childhood. My parents were very young when they had me, and there was a lot of trauma in my life of a variety of sorts. And growing up in an abusive environment, I was in survival mode for so long that I didn't have time to consider, was I a badass or not? I was just trying to survive. And on top of that, you're trying to figure out who in the world you are in fitting in, right? And so there was just like so much going on in my life that I think somewhere deep down, I knew I was a badass, but I had to figure out how to let it be in the world, right? Like my badassery to be instead of worrying about what other people thought. And I think actually growing up in a very difficult environment, like kind of pushed me into this place where I realized I was never going to be quote unquote normal. And so it kind of did me a favor in a way, or at least I've turned it into that.
So what was the turning point for you? Was it one specific instance or was it like a series of events?
It was a series of events. There was a deeply profound trauma that occurred in my life when I was 15, and it led to a lot of really difficult questions. And the question I kept asking myself is, like, do I have to be who my parents keep telling me I should be? And failing at it miserably, right? Like trying to be normal. I was failing. I was terrible. First of all, I'm 6'1". I know that like people listening can't see that and you can't necessarily see it on a recording either, but I'm 6'1". So I was born to stand out. Right. And I kept trying to fit myself into this normal box. So I think at 15, questioning everything I was being told by not just my parents, but everyone around them, it flipped this switch in my head. And I started reading voraciously, and I started writing poetry so I could find my own voice. And I started really diving into dance in a way that helped me to like move through trauma, because I danced from the time I was like 18 months old. And I started finding all these ways to use my voice or to find my voice, right? And then it took me another, 18 years. I was 32 when I started my business. So between 15 and 32, I'm not good at math on the fly in my head at the moment. But it took me a number of years to be able to recognize that I was never going to like fit what other people wanted. So I think between 30 and 32, there was this another like there was a renaissance, right? Like at 15, there was this trauma. And then at 30, at about 30, I'd worked through all these traumas to a place that I was like, no, I am a badass and I got this. And it took me another 2 years to be able to like actually form my business, and then another 2 to leave my full-time job. But all along the way, I think each time you choose yourself, each time you choose your authentic self, you find this level of badass you didn't know existed, right? Like you find yourself. And by doing so, I really think that's what badassery is. It's tapping into our authentic self, the person we were created to be. And when we tap into our authentic self, we find our purpose. And when all these things align, then we're like, oh, okay, great. Now I know I'm powerful, right? Because I'm not trying to be everyone else. I'm just trying to be the best me.
Yes, so good. And I think that's important for us to hear, because it's a good reminder. It doesn't have to change overnight. It's like a series of steps that you can take. And then over time, it builds more and more confidence. So I love that.
Yeah, it's always like there's always another level of badass, always.
Yes, absolutely. So I can't wait to dig in more. But first, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So my name is Shana Francesca. And I am a writer, speaker, interior designer, and life designer. I really lean into what you guys talk about, right? Like, how do people find their badass and how do they align that and figure out what their intention for their life is? And then it's not about doing more with our life, it's about being more intentional about what we're doing in our life already. And then we find ways to let go of what no longer belongs to us and invite what's meant for us, in our purpose, in the things, our clothes, our whole life. So it's really this holistic approach to interior design. And yeah, some clients, I just go in and I make their house really beautiful, but many of them refer to me as their life coach / interior designer. So we just kind of adopted it.
Nice. I love that. So you talked about doing more, going from doing more to being more. Can you expand on that a little bit? And how do you do that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's such a powerful question. I think for me, the doing more, it's a distraction, right? Like when we're doing, we don't have even a moment to be quiet with ourselves and to listen to what we need, right? And I think that's so much of a woman's life in this country, maybe around the world. I can only speak from my experience, is that for so long it was like, yes, women are super women, blah, blah, blah. That was always just an excuse for women to keep taking on more and other people to keep giving it to them, right? And I don't have to be a superwoman to be a badass, right? I don't have to take on doing more and doing more. I get to ask for help and I get to take up space. And when we take up space, right? Space is infinite, literally, physically, space is infinite. We have no idea where it ends. So when we understand that there's more than enough room in this world and there's more than enough help and people in this world, we get to take up as much space as we need and we get to breathe for a minute and stop defining ourselves by being the fixer and the doer and just get to be, right? We are valid simply because we exist and not because we can do all these things for all these people. And sinking into that takes a hell of a lot of time. It took me a really long time. And it still comes up for me to dismantle the idea of being the one who always has the answers, right? And like can do all the things. Because we learn to define ourselves by the skills we have. And by taking a step back from that and just like being present in the moment, we can be like, no, I'm me. And so I'm valid and I'm strong and I'm beautiful and I'm all these things. Or what if I'm not strong? What if that doesn't define me either, right? What if I'm just me? What if I'm just Shayna?
Oh, to be yours, you heard it from Shayna. I get to ask for help and take up space. I think that is so important and it needed to be resaid because it's one of those things that is a struggle. And I think, we are taught to help everybody and do everything we can and take take the world's problems on our shoulders, but you need help too, and I think it's powerful to ask for help.
It is very powerful. So there was this book I read a few years back, Amanda Palmer, she did a TED Talk, about asking for help. And she was this street performer. Now she's married to Neil Gaiman, who created American Gods, for anyone who's familiar. Very profound, prolific writer. But she was a street performer and she like literally made her living from like people's donations and basically couch surfing. And she wrote the book all about how she was able to make it through her life just by asking for help and how it became like it was literally second nature to her. And then her realization that that's not second nature especially for most women. And I read that book at the beginning of starting my business and I was like, oh, I hear it. Like sometimes you're like, this is definitely a message from God, like the universe, right, spirit, whatever you call the higher power. I'm like, oh yeah, I hear you. Okay. I'm asking for help. It still takes a really long time to get to the place where you're comfortable with it and actually invite help, right? Like
Right.
that's a whole nother thing, right? Inviting help and looking for it wherever you are, because it's always there. But as women, especially most of the time, we're like, no, I got it. It's okay. I mean, how many times do we say that, right? And how
Right.
many times do we apologize for simply existing, which actually pushes help away, right? Like then people are like, oh, okay, she's got it. She's got it. She's got it. When we like sit and we're like, no, I get to take up a space, then help comes to us.
Yeah. And that kind of reminds me, like we have, well, like not speaking for everybody, but it can be easy to be hard to receive from other people and to get things from other people. And then when we need help, we're like, where is it? But we're not even, our eyes aren't even really open to all the possibility and all the help that's available to us.
Yeah. And I think especially as women, we're programmed to not want or need help, right? We're programmed like you've got to figure out how to do it all on your own, right? Be the wife, the mother, the sexual tigress, all the things, right? Like you're supposed to be all these things. And there's so many definitions of what it means to be quote unquote a good woman. And I've done my best to eliminate that from my vocabulary, like, and not allow other people to use that term to define someone like ever again. like being like, oh, you're such a good girl. Oh, like I hear myself say that. And I'm like, no, wait, I'm programming that. Me saying that is programming that behavior that she must be all the things. Right. Yeah. And I don't want that. Right. And so by eliminating that from my vocabulary and speaking to other women, I get to eliminate that in my own vocabulary. And then I get to say to a woman who's like, no, I got it. Be like, you know what? I think I'm going to jump in and help and help you anyway, or in what way can I, this is even better. I started asking women differently instead of a yes or no question, like, can I help you? And then being able to say yes. I'm like, in what ways can I help you? Right. So I'm still getting their permission to help, but I'm not allowing them to say no necessarily. Right. It's not as easy to say no when someone says, in what ways can I help you? Right. That's been like really helpful in my life especially with my female friends, because we deny help so often.
Yeah. No, I think that's super helpful. And sometimes it's also just diving in and helping, right. It's just like not asking when somebody's having a hard time and then you just take them
go.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And, but I also started recognizing that sometimes that help needs to be wanted for it to be actually help. Like there's times where I thought I was helping and I wasn't helping. Right. And there's sometimes, like you said, if someone's got a death, you make something, you can make something and bring something over. You can go over, clean that person's house or whatever it is. And when you're really close with someone, you kind of know what they need. But then there's people in my life who are more in the periphery. We're not interacting on a daily basis. And especially for them, I'm definitely asking for permission to be able to provide the help that they want or need. It's all about, like, I keep reaffirming consent in my life, right? Because again, permission, we're not allowed to say no as women, right? So I'm also like letting women say no when they need to say no, but I'm recognizing that we're taught to say no all the time, but also like say no to each other, say no to help, but not no to men, right? There's all these like weird messages that we get. So, it's complicated being a woman. I think that's what it's complicated being a woman. It's complicated being a person, and even more being a badass, constantly questioning, is there a better way to do what I'm already doing?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of part of the journey or part of the growth, like your journey to badassery, you can,
yes,
you're never done. You're never done.
No.
And I like to say, it's not a big journey to get there to be a badass. You just have to make a decision and say, yes, I am a badass. But then, we're constantly growing and learning. And so I think that's important.
Yeah. I look at the lives of women like Polly Murray or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and they were badasses till the day they died. They were constantly looking for ways to improve upon themselves in the way that they represented themselves, in the way that they represented, people, right? And took care of other people. And so I'm like, badasses till the day we die.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I know earlier you talked about having trauma at 15 and then kind of taking a journey until like 30 to 32. What was your spiritual journey, or what did you do along the way?
Oh, really good question. So I grew up very conservative Christian. And there was a lot of rules around that. Right. And um, it was very dogmatic the way that I was. Right. And this isn't necessarily everyone's experience with Christianity, but this is my experience and the way that I was raised. It was all about control, right? Christianity was used to control me and to tell me what I was and was not allowed to do and what would or would not send me to hell, right? And so hell was used as this way to create fear and to control me. And there were so many times I questioned what was going on around me, and I questioned the people in leadership, right? Because when they were made aware of these traumas and who perpetrated them, they were legally obligated to go to the police, and they did not, right? They did their best actually to sweep them under the rug. And so I started really questioning what is God to me, right? And that started at 15, and it still progresses to this day, where I'm like, no, I don't want any religion to define my relationship with God, the universe, spirit. I get to have this beautiful direct relationship, and I get to understand what is appropriate for me in my life, right? There are laws, there are absolutes. And then there are just rules that other people create that feel more like a way of controlling than they feel like something beneficial for me, right? And so eliminating my, I don't want to say dependence, because it wasn't dependence. It was releasing my attachment to rules other people created has been a huge part of my spiritual journey. And recognizing that, that I get to define how I worship God. No one else does. And maybe that makes some people a little uncomfortable, but I would rather spend the rest of my life disappointing other people than ever disappoint myself again. Because I spent so much time disappointing myself and being uncomfortable in my own skin. And that's been part of my journey to badassery. My spiritual journey has been a huge part of that, is knowing that I am being honoring and being true to myself, who I was created to be, and no one else gets to define that.
So did you find that strengthened your relationship with God?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Yeah. My relationship with God, I now spend more time in prayer and meditation every day than I ever did. I spend typically like 2 hours meditating every day, for an hour in the morning and an hour before I go to sleep. And my relationship with God is and with other people in my life, has shifted so profoundly. I'm not questioning myself all the time. I'm not questioning them anymore. I'm not asking them to define my life. I'm just defining it for myself. And so, yeah, my relationship with God has become so much stronger now that I no longer refer to God as He. And I recognize how close God is to me.
So I would love to dive in a little bit about meditation, because I think that it is an absolute game changer, and it's not done nearly enough, I don't believe. But if you'll talk about that and what your practice is and how it has helped you.
Yeah. First, I want to start by saying, I'm sure that there's plenty of women who listen to the podcast who are mothers and may not have an hour in the morning or an hour in the evening. But I do encourage everyone to try to carve out time for yourself, right? It goes back to what I said in the beginning, is we get to take up space. So if you've got to ask for help so that you can get some time to yourself every single day, then maybe there's a way, right? There's always a way. There's an infinite number of possibilities. And so I just encourage you to kind of lean into what does help look like so that you can get time for yourself. I happen to be single and don't have any children, so there's no impediment other than business to me being able to set aside that time for myself. But for me, meditation is, and actually I'm sitting on my meditation mat while we're recording this.
Nice.
For me, I actually, at first, when I first started meditating, it was not that serious for me. Like I was just trying to figure out what in the world meditation is, right? And that was a few years ago. Like, what is meditation? Is it breathing? Is it just closing my eyes? Is it prayer? Like I had to kind of define that for myself. And luckily I have some really beautiful spiritual people in my life. And I feel like when we start to ask those questions, the people with the answers start kind of coming around us, right? Or we find the answers within our own selves. And I started reading a couple of books that talked about their meditation practice as part of their journey to kind of badassery, right? And I was like, okay, this feels like it's something important. So I used to just meditate laying on my bed when I first woke up in the morning for a few minutes. I'm not the kind of person who falls back asleep very easily. So that was a good place for me to start. And it really just started with like 1 minute or 30 seconds. And then after a couple of weeks, I doubled it. And then I doubled it again. And now, and then it became like 10 to 15 minutes a day. And now it's more like an hour twice a day. It's really just, it's not like my mind is clear the entire time. I'm not superhuman, it's more that I'm just actively releasing the noise, right? Like just taking that time to actively release the noise and be like, I know there's all these things and that's okay. There's all these things to do. We're going to get there, right? But for this moment, I'm going to care for myself. And just be quiet with myself. And a lot of times what helped me in my meditation was actually imagining a beam of light coming from the sky straight through my body into the ground. And I don't know why that really transformed my meditation practice specifically, but it really felt like it grounded me. And what's really great is like when it's warm out or when I'm in a warm climate, I'll go and sit outside. And so I feel the sun on my face. So it's really like my mind, my body is in alignment with feeling that beam of light. And it helps me to kind of clear out the noise. And I have to say that it's transformed my life, because giving ourselves that space to pause adds pauses in our life where we didn't know we needed them before, right? Like we might pause before we say something or pause before we respond, to know that we don't have to have the answer immediately all the time, right? It allows us to take up space in a way we didn't know existed before. And just honoring ourselves changes everything. And you don't even know the ways that it's going to change everything until it just does. And you look back and you're like, oh, this never used to happen. Oh, that's pretty badass.
Yeah. And I think it allows us to be silent. It allows us to not be like fidgeting, or like with technology, it's so easy to be on our phone or watch TV, and I know for me, it has grounded me a whole lot more. Like throughout the day, I'll be a whole lot more comfortable with my decisions, instead of like second guessing myself and be like, oh, is this right? I'm just like, nope, this is how I want to go.
Yeah, it allows you to like tap into intuition, right? Like our deeper wisdom, the things that we didn't know we knew. When we allow ourselves to stop doing all the time and just be, those things come up, that wisdom comes up. And now I specifically bought a meditation mat and a meditation cushion, and I have a specific spot, and I kind of keep that spot as like honored for myself. No one else ever touches it. Even when like the cleaner comes, I like move it myself and put it on my bed and then bring it back. Because I believe that we all carry energy, right? And we are all energy. Literally, physics tells us we're made up of energy. And so I really want to be that intentional with the place that I meditate. It's a place for reflection. It's a place for beauty. And I don't want anyone else to touch it because I don't know what their intention in their life is, right? And so it feels a little like, maybe a little crazy. I don't know. But I'm that intentional with it. I just don't want anyone else to touch it.
So it sounds like this spirituality, this journey you've been on, has helped you into your business, and that you've taken that into your business. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Building a business is one of the hardest things I've ever chosen to do. And I emphasize chosen because going through the life that I've been through, I went through plenty that was harder, but it wasn't a choice. I didn't, that choice was taken from me. Choosing to build a business is it's like a marriage, right? It's every single day you've got to choose it. And you also need to choose yourself. Meditation has allowed me to take a pause when considering taking on a new client. Really checking in with myself and checking in with my team and being like, this is the experience I'm having with these initial interviews with this potential client. What are your guys' thoughts? What are you feeling? Because my project manager sometimes will come with me, or she'll be on a second phone call, or something like that, so that we're introducing her as somebody who's going to be helping to manage the project. And it's allowed me the space to walk away, to say, I think this is a great project, but I also think that I'm not the right person for it, that we are not the right company for it. I think your intention for your life and our intention for the company are just not aligned. And to be able to walk away. And it's also allowed me the space when a client maybe being passive aggressive, or, because as women, we're taught to be passive aggressive, right? Like, we're not allowed to use our voice. And so a lot of times things are not communicated in the moment, right? They're bottled up, they're held in. And then there's this like moment where a client will communicate something or not communicate it fully, like indirectly communicated, or there's just a behavior that starts to come up. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, then it gives me the moment to pause and say, hey, what's going on? And with kindness and with compassion, just say, hey, this way of responding. Like, I've had clients, when especially at the beginning of the pandemic, had to tell some clients that like their furniture was going to be months late. I had a client hang up on me in the middle of the call. And when I called back, she didn't answer. And so I had to send her a message, just be like, hey, I understand this is frustrating, but I can't help you if you won't talk to me, right? We have got to respect each other, and we get to both use our voice in a respectful way, right? And so hanging up on me is not acceptable. Saying that you need a break and stepping away and then, removing yourself from a call is perfectly acceptable, but we're not going to just hang up the phone, right? Like, when you're ready, come back and let's talk about it, right? And so like to have these moments where, and most of my clients are like 50 plus. So like for me, I'm like 10, 13 years younger, 15, 20 years younger sometimes than them. So it's like, it can be an odd dynamic, but because I come to it with compassion, they usually come back and they're like, you're right. No one's ever told me I get to take up space and I get to use my voice. So I'm sorry, let's move forward. Right. And so like, there's this beautiful transformational moment where now there's a deeper trust, right? Because now I've been like, hey, you don't need my permission. You get to use your voice. Right. And then there's been moments where like male clients have just been very dominating or domineering. And I just get to be like, I get what's coming up for you. Right. Like, I get that I have a lot of knowledge that you feel like is maybe stepping on your toes. So let's just like take a breath and take a minute, and let's just consider what we're saying and how we're saying it. And then sometimes we just decide to go our separate ways if that behavior or that pattern starts showing up, or, it also lets my clients hold me accountable, right? Goes both ways. And meditation is it's really, for me, I guess what I'm saying is it's transformed the communication in my life, because it's allowed the space for everyone to be able to use their voice and to be able to be respectful and honor ourselves and then honor each other.
So what I liked about that is it sounds like you're setting really good and really healthy boundaries, and that isn't always easy. Is that something that you've always been great at doing, or has that come along the way? How did you go about learning to set boundaries?
Yeah, setting boundaries is such a good question. Setting boundaries is not something we're allowed, or I wasn't taught to be allowed to have them growing up. And so it has definitely been a significant part of my journey. And I think a lot of our society, they allow boundaries in certain places and not in others, and depending on your gender and so on and so forth. And so I guess what I'm calling people into is an awareness that we all are excessively powerful human beings. And when we abdicate that, right, or we refuse to recognize that, we really hurt one another. And none of us are bad or are good. We're just we're just human, right? And in any given moment, we might be the monster in one person's life and the hero in another. But recognizing for myself, like where I wasn't observing other people's boundaries and where it felt like conflict was coming up in my life, usually that's where a boundary is being violated somehow. Either a boundary wasn't vocalized or acknowledged by both parties, or one person is not recognizing that they've got a boundary there and they're kind of pushing back in a really aggressive way. When that conflict comes up, that's a moment for me to be like, oh, that's a boundary, right? Whether it's me getting defensive or someone else getting defensive, like that's a boundary. Something's been violated somewhere. And so to be able to like recognize that and implement that in my life, that understanding, it helps me to call other people into that as well. And it's a messy process. Like being human is messy, right? There's nothing clean or comfortable about it. And I think so much of the time we think that relationships are good. They're in a good standing when we're not fighting, when we're not having a disagreement, when we're not, having conflict. But when we look at growth is pain, right? Like for a plant or for us as human beings, when I hit my growth spurt, when I was like 13, I grew like 3 inches in a month. And it was one of the most physically painful things I've gone through in my life. When we build muscle, we're creating space, right, in between what was and what is, and that space fills in with new muscle. And so when we think about boundaries or our lives that way, is we're creating space between who we are and what we're becoming, and it gets to be messy, but we need that space for growth. That pain is growth. That conflict is growth. And we can have conflict, we can have disagreement and be respectful of one another, right? But that conflict also teaches us that we care enough to fight, right? Like relationships that don't have any conflict, that worries me because there's no growth there, right? It's stagnated. And quite frankly, at that point, it's dying. So I look at conflict as a moment to sit back and say, okay, where can we grow from this? Where is our relationship going to be strengthened from this? And that's in my personal life, with my family, with my clients. It's a moment for growth for everyone, but especially for me. And so, yeah, it's life is messy. Let's just dive in, right?
And I liked how you talked about the conflict and boundaries, because I've never heard that before. Like when you're experiencing conflict, there's likely a boundary violation. So I thought that was very interesting because I've never heard it said that way before, but it absolutely makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if that's 100% true, but that's just my experience.
Yeah, it seems true. So I'm going to start paying attention to that.
Okay.
So I know we're winding down here. One thing I wanted to ask you is if you have a powerful or a resource that has been powerful for you, whether it's a book, whether it's a podcast or a YouTube channel, something that has made a difference in your life.
I read a lot. So the answer to that is like, yes, books, podcasts. There's a couple books that really helped me to dive into curiosity and really understand what boundaries, just start viewing the world in a different way. Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking to Strangers, is really, really powerful for me. Jen Sincero's book, You Are a Badass, absolutely life-changing. The first 2 years of my business, it was basically my Bible. I basically never stopped reading it or listening to it. And right now, so I just finished reading Adam Grant's Think Again, which I highly recommend for everyone. Again, leaning into our humanity and our curiosity is just really powerful in transforming our life. And I'm in the middle of reading Joe Dispenza's Becoming Supernatural. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Becoming Supernatural. Yes. Yeah. So I'm in the middle of reading that, which it's one of those books that I've got to like pause and give myself a day and like implement and then like move on. And then as far as like trauma, dealing with my own personal trauma, because I really truly believe that we all have trauma in some way. I had to come to the understanding that I have complex PTSD. And so diving into that and understanding what PTSD is, there's this beautiful, amazing book called The Body Keeps the Score. And I highly recommend that book, but I also highly recommend that you understand that the book itself, by describing what PTSD is and what trauma is, can be triggering all by itself. So I highly recommend that you have a support system, a therapist, something there for you while you're reading that book.
So good. Yes, I will add all of those to the show notes. Thank you very much. And let's end with a tip to encourage women who are in the arena fighting for the life that they want.
I would say that curiosity and intention are going to be two powerful tools. Questioning, just getting like think about putting yourself in your 3-year-old self's mind, right? Like viewing the world from this place of curiosity and playfulness and what's possible. We have no idea what's possible. And that transforms our relationships and all of these things too. And then intention, not doing more things, but being more intentional about how we doing them, down to things like, coordinating the scents on our body, right? Like all these scents matching up instead of just buying them randomly, being like, okay, how do these smells smell together, right? Like little things like that, just questioning the ways that we can be more intentional and implementing them in our lives can really transform how we feel about ourselves, and knowing that we get to take up space and we get to do it really beautifully. We don't just get to take up space, we get to take up beautiful space.
Nice. So how can we connect with you?
So many ways. But the easiest way is my website. And then there's a link tree link at the top right of the website. But my business website is concinnate.world. That's CONCINNATE.world. And there's lots of information about the business. And then there's a tab about myself as well.
Thank you so much, Shayna. You've been a total badass and I've enjoyed hearing your story.
Thank you, Marie. This has been a great conversation.
And with that, we'll end our show. To all the badass women out there staying in the arena, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, own it and get after it.